I was talking to someone on Discord a few days ago, and they were asking about what do you do when it comes to covering an indie game compared to a triple or double A? How much slack do you give a developer if you're used to playing everything from Call of Duty to Final Fantasy to Madden and so forth? And it made me think about how much indie has really changed and what does it mean in terms of what's fair and unfair when you're talking and reviewing an indie game. So we're going to talk about that for today's critical thought, but I also want to lay out some very important information about what that also means for a developer who's working on their first fully realized indie title. When it comes to the indie space, so much about it has grown dramatically over the last decade. It's why I say that the 2010s for the game industry will be known as the decade of indie development. The term indie has changed dramatically over the span of those 10 years, going from just being shovelware games you would find in a $1.99 bin at a Target or Walmart, to tour de force artistic expressions that in many cases have either stood side by side or have gone above their AAA counterparts, as we've seen with games like Celeste, The Outer Wilds, Disco Elysium, Hades, taking home top nominations from a lot of people. This also means, from a journalism or just covering video games point of view, that more and more people are being exposed to the indie market. And it does represent a different thing to look at when it comes to reviewing games, especially if you spend your entire life, playing or reviewing everything from Call of Duty, Madden, and whatever other AAA game you can think of. And it is important, I think, to give any developers slack in some areas. For one thing, you cannot complain to an indie team about why your game doesn't have the same amount of content as Call of Duty, or a Nintendo game, or pick any Final Fantasy title. Likewise, one thing that I see a lot of people argue about when it comes to indie games is the idea of, graphical fidelity. This indie game made by 3 people doesn't feature 4K super high-def graphics with whatever that new feature on video cards, or RTX lighting, or whatever it is. And as we've said before, when it comes to aesthetics versus just, raw fidelity of graphics, that aesthetics will win out in the end. And that is one area where indie developers have certainly shined with games that you can look at and you immediately recognize that title, and it just is amazing. Especially when we look at different styles, such as high quality pixel art, billboarding, cell shading, and so on. Now, it is fair to point out gameplay issues, and you have to be able to look at what was the goal of the development or the goal of the game design, and whether or not those developers achieve that. And while it may sound a little mysterious and hard, it can become easy as you look at more and more games. If you're trying to sell me on a brutally difficult survival sim, but all I need to do is 5 things and then my entire base is completely sustainable for the next 100 hours, there's kind of a miscommunication there. Also, elements that are relating to bug fixes and general kind of quality of life issues can certainly be brought up, such as, no volume sliders, not having an easy to accessible option screen, keyword bindings, and so on. When it comes to bug fixes and things like that, it really depends on the nature and severity of it. If a character's shirt accidentally changes from green to purple when you walk through a tunnel, okay, it's annoying, but it's not a big deal. If you hit the start button, the game entirely crashes and blows up your hard drive, you may want to mention that in your review. But there's this general tendency, I think, from some people to downplay gameplay issues. That, if it's an indie darling, if it's a game from a developer that you don't want to I guess cause waves, I guess would be the matter of expression here, matter of speaking. But it can be very disingenuous to ignore gameplay issues, especially if they are very overt issues. And unfortunately, I see this from games that become indie darlings, where when it gets to the mainstream, there are noticeable issues that nobody brings up in their reviews at all. And you don't want to do that because, one, it comes off as being very fake in terms of reviews, and two, as we've said, a lot about game development is iteration and refinement. If you're not finding out what the issues are with your games, you're not learning how to make them better. And then you're going to repeat those problems again and again. But with all that said, there is something important we need to talk about when it comes to indie developers and what consumers expect from indies today and where you're not going to be able to get that slack cut. And we're going to talk about that next, but as always, we're going to take a quick break. If you're interested in my thoughts on design, then check these out. For entry-level students, we have 20 essential games to study, and then the Game Design Deep Dive series that takes an extensive look at different genres, with free-to-play coming in 2022. Alright, we're not doing gameplay footage here because it is serious time. When it comes to the independent space, as I said in the last part and many times over, what people expect from an indie developer has changed. What worked 1 year, 5 years, 10 years ago is not going to work today. And that also means that for first-time developers coming in, you are entering a market that is not only well-established, but it's one where the consumer base has become educated about these titles. The days in which you could just say, I'm going to make a match 3 game, or, Mario was really good, I'm just going to make a platformer just like it, and have that game even sell, horribly, is not going to happen anymore. And there's going to be several shots fired in the next few minutes, and here's one. If you've ever uttered this in an interview or to people when you're describing your game, we wanted to make a game in this genre, but after trying it, we had no idea it would be that difficult or complicated. You just hurt my soul a little bit when you said that. As we have discussed many times over, research into genres, understanding that there's these different aspects when it comes to game development, are crucial to survival. Because there are plenty of indie developers out there who have failed, not because they did something wrong, but because they didn't understand what was right, or what people expected from those genres and those designs. And it's time for a very harsh truth when it comes to game development. I'm going to give you in no short list. These are the following points that the mass market consumer does not care about when it comes to game development or game developers. They don't care if you are trying to write a heartfelt LGBTQ plus story. They don't care if you're trying to make a game that is supposed to represent minorities or people who have not been fully represented in video games. They don't care about the ethnicities, religions, or backgrounds of you and your company. They don't care who you hired or anything about the people behind those games. They don't care what your background is when it comes to game development or going from somewhere else. They don't care if you spend 1 year, 5 years, or 10 years of your life on this game. They don't care how many awards your game has won at trade shows. They don't care if you and all your famous indie developer friends enjoyed this concept. They don't care if this is your first game, your 5th game, your 50th game. And they most certainly don't care if you developing the game was easy or was it a nightmare struggle. There is only one thing that they care about. What is the quality of this game that I am looking at on Steam, itch, Humble, eShops, XBLA, PSN, or any other new platforms, EGS? But the reason why I'm saying this is that while you can certainly give indie developers a lot of slack in some areas, the one area that you cannot downplay or ignore is the gameplay and the general feel of your title. Because I have seen plenty of indie developers who will say, I'm just going to focus on story. Or, I never really played the genre before. How hard can it be to design? And when we get those games, they are structurally faulty. And it doesn't take long for somebody like me to find these things out. And if I'm having problems playing your game, you know a lot of other people are. In some cases, they may not even play your game. They may take one look at the store page and go, ugh. And they're not going to do it. And I know some of you are going to try and counter me on a few of these points. And it's time for another shot fired. If you have not sold a game that has gotten at least 5,000 positive reviews on Steam, you are not in the position to argue. Because as we've said many times before, and the point about game wisdom in these videos, we're talking about how to not only survive in the game industry, but to thrive and financially support yourself. And those two last points are very different compared to just making video games or just releasing any concept and prototype you want on itch or even on your own site. And consumers are far more educated when it comes to the types of games they want and the quality of those games than they were 5 to 10 years ago. Like I said, for every major indie game that breaks out into the mainstream, that becomes a new standard in which other games are going to be judged by, whether fairly or unfairly. Again, if you're trying to make a game that is a modern retro title or inspired by a game that you really liked, and it handles worse, it looks worse, and it's just a poorly made example of that game, nobody's going to want to play that. And it does mean you have to step it up if you want people to notice your game. The market has shifted in the opposite direction from the race to the dollar that was a major point of about 3 to 5 years ago. People are more than happy to spend $14.99, $19.99, $25, $30 on a game if it knocks it out of the park. They don't want to spend $2.99, $1.99, 50 cents on some cheap, quick thing that they'll be done with in about 20 seconds. And for developers watching this, if you've had those major ideas that you want to try and make, and you're hoping that the market is open to spending a little bit more on them, now is the time to do that. But if you've been somebody who's been only working on games selling, 1 month to 3 month projects for $2.99, $3.99, whatnot, that market is no longer there. And if there are still people buying those games, there's fewer and fewer of them. And as I've said many times, if you want to succeed in this market, you need to do your research. Because just saying to yourself, we've never made a game before, but let's try and compete with Fortnite and Celeste at the same time, that's not going to work. There are dozens of examples of amazing games that have risen and blown up, and there are now probably hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of games that have crashed and burned. And for developers out there, you cannot get by on anything else that is not gameplay related. Again, I've seen people try and copy Gone Home, Amnesia, Dear Esther, What Remains of Edith Finch, story-driven games, but people want to have a great experience. And it doesn't matter if you are telling the most thought-provoking story ever written if the controls are horrible. And I have another video that I'm going to be recording about open world design and why a lot of people fall into that trap. At the end of the day, a video game is meant to be played. And that is the standard that consumers are going to judge. Again, they don't care about the story of your studio. They don't care about the story of you and your employees. They just want to play a game. And if the quality is not there, it doesn't matter how much you and the rest of the indie community is shouting from the rooftops for people to play this game. They're not going to. And there is a lot more that I can certainly rant and rave about when it comes to marketing and what this means for the wider space out there. But I think I've caused enough trouble. Every few hundred subscribers or so, I like to make a video to see how much trouble I'll get into. And we'll see where I'm at now when this video goes up. But again, to summarize everything here, indie developers get cut a lot of slack when it comes to the overall presentation and the refinement of their titles compared to AAA. I have played many indie games that I've had issues with, but I stuck with them because the experience was so unique or so well thought out that there's nothing else like it. But conversely, indie developers are going to be consistently judged by the quality of the other games out there, whether it is in a genre that you are working with or not. People want amazing experiences. They don't want to play a game that has a great story but feels horrible to control. And while you will always get people who are willing to look past those issues, you are leaving a lot of the consumers and potential fans behind if you don't refine and understand what works and what doesn't work about these respective genres. So, with all that said, thanks for watching this kind of melancholy critical thought. If you're new, do all the liking and subscribing. Check out both the Game Wisdom channel and our gameplay channel. We have our Discord and Patreon link down below. And come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games and get in trouble from time to time.